gaming. A 6-letter word for an audiovisual interactive activity mostly consisting of misogynism.
Men are such judgmental prigs. You need us women to help straighten you out.
Inceldom.
Hello Twitter world, it's yours truly,
Racism.
What a fucking
And uncontrollable fits of rage. Since gaming's inception in the 70s, we've experienced such hits as Furry Vengeance the Game.
Who wants a new Wii? Huh?
Serbian Immigrant Simulator.
No! The pigeon is no! 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 Damn it! No! No!
And of course, the horny robot game.
Yeah. Robots just made a naked Sephiroth.
There's so much to experience in the world of gaming. Some may consider visiting 4chan/VBoard in order to learn more, but may lose faith in humanity in the process. Others may opt to visit the /video games subreddit, but will lose brain cells in doing so.
Look at you. Thinking you have all the power in the world, thinking you could trick me. I've fallen for your illusion. How disappointing. So, you're gonna longingly gaze at me.
At the end of the day, the best way to experience video games is just by playing them. Well, that and watching annoyingly long video essays on them. Final Fantasy is a large and expansive series spanning the last 30 years and is easily the most recognizable JRPG franchise. That's not to say that every entry in the series has been good, but we'll touch more on that later. The original Final Fantasy, created by Hironobu Sakaguchi, was released in 1987 for the NES and was developed by Square. If you're at all curious about how Square and Enix became one company, you can check out this video. Trust me, it isn't at all shit, and I'm not just being biased. Square originally had very little faith in the RPG genre and told Sakaguchi to fuck right off.
Shut the fuck up, no one cares about
Final Fantasy game.
Know your fucking place, trash.
It wasn't until the release of Dragon's Quest that Square decided to attempt Sakaguchi's idea. He collected a small team together which included Akitoshi Kawazu, Koichi Ishii, Kenji Torada, Nobuo Uematsu, Kazuko Shibuya, nassir Gabeli, Yoshitaka Amano, Kiyoshi Yoshi, Ken Narita, and Hiroyuki Ito. A B-team was later created to aid in the development of the game, despite the fact that the higher-ups at Square were expecting a steaming pile of dog shit. Instead, he and his staff produced a game that would cement itself as a classic staple of the Nintendo home entertainment system and the role-playing video game genre as a whole. The game sold incredibly well in Japan and did alright once it was localized in the US too in 1990. From then on, the train never stopped for Sakaguchi and the Final Fantasy series, even though many thought that it should have. Hell, 14's good enough. Right now, it's just shut-in weebs who can't stop nutting to JPEGs of historical figures with massive tits that are heavily addicted to Final Fantasy XIV. But soon, very soon, it'll be you playing. No one ever escapes. The whole world will be frothing at the mouth for more Final Fantasy XIV expansions, and maybe a few Square Enix NFTs too. By 2001, there were already 10 mainline entries. 5 to 10 are considered by most to be the best games in the entire series. FF's jump from Nintendo to Sony's PlayStation allowed for more emotion and action in the characters and story. Each entry being standalone was great too, meaning you could jump into any of them and have an entirely different experience from any of the games in the series prior. Each game is distinctly different, and while lately it's become harder and harder to make them more original, those games between 5 and 10 were all vastly distinct from one another. Final Fantasy VI's stark, heavy industrial setting completely parallels 9's mystical medieval fantasy world. Each game is a unique experience, unparalleled by most JRPGs today. Now I'd love to cover each and every game in the series in this video, but I think I'd fucking die of hunger and thirst, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I want to focus on a specific game in the series, one that is often overlooked and forgotten about compared to its contemporaries. Final Fantasy VII, baby! That joke might have been made completely redundant due to the title and thumbnail, but whatever, fuck off. Before I talk about Final Fantasy VII though, I want to make a confession. I'm not a very big fan of the Final Fantasy series. Yes, I did a lot of praising at the beginning of this video, but that's mostly to pander to the larger majority of brainlets who exclusively play weeaboo games.
Stupid faggot little cocksucker!
I assumed that they were satisfied to the point of nutting, and then scampered off back to Reddit before they heard me say anything negative. So now that all those Kumas with holes in their brains have pissed off, let me explain why I don't really like Final Fantasy. The games are all foreign and weird. Okay, that's a joke. The truth is kinda hard to explain. To try and put it as simply as possible, I find the stories, characters, and gameplay to be weirdly inferior to a lot of other RPGs that I've played. I think games like Nier Automata, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, and Oblivion do a lot of things better. The Oblivion one was a joke, don't come at me with that.
That really pisses me off.
I understand that Square Enix wants to reach a larger audience to make sales, so they can't really include a lot of the darker elements and themes presented in those other games, but early on it wasn't really like that. Those first few games, particularly 7, didn't really care if they were ostracizing children and lolicons. Never mind, I forgot Yuffie was in the game. That might be hyperbole, but a lot of what makes 7 so gritty and mesmerizing is the veil of darkness draped over it. It's often so intense and suffocating, it makes every battle feel like the opening to Final Destination 3. While I like the remake a lot, I don't think it achieves the same level of disparity and bleakness as the original. It doesn't help that the game is bloated with so much anime garbage, it often feels like I'm playing some modded version of Persona 5 though. Later on I'll talk more in depth about Final Fantasy VII Remake, as it is meant to be the main focus of this video, but for now I want to add some context by exploring the original for a bit. Released on the 31st of January 1997, Final Fantasy VII quickly became one of the highest selling video games of the time. It sold 10 million copies, making it the second best selling game on the PlayStation, and was only beaten out by Gran Turismo, which was released 11 months later. There's not much left to say about the game that hasn't already been said. It's a masterclass in both storytelling and, for its time, gameplay. Marketing JRPGs in the West was, and still is, very hard, but Final Fantasy VII managed to explode worldwide. Most likely it was the dystopian cyberpunk setting and narrative that drew Westerners into Final Fantasy VII, much like how predatory Minecraft YouTubers would capture children with their brainlit videos. I don't know if I can leave that joke in. Final Fantasy VII is a classic of the early 3D era of gaming. Its popularity was immense, resulting in a dogshit film, a spin-off prequel game, and a crossover with Disney, that crossover being Kingdom Hearts.
Oh, right. Hades, we gotta talk.
Now while the game is clunky by today's standards, it's still incredibly enjoyable. There's something so charming about early 3D and video games where everything was polygonal and deformed and characters' faces were either sketched on awkwardly or completely non-existent. It's easy to look at the graphics now and laugh, but back then this game was impressive visually. While games like Metal Gear Solid and Vagrant Story attempted to create realistic characters and proportions using the resources they had, Square Enix opted to get creative with their designs. Not to say there's anything wrong with the designs in Metal Gear Solid or Vagrant Story, but they look a little off. Whether it's because Snake doesn't have a face, or because Sydney is without nipples, there's something uncanny about them. a chibi style was a great fit with the limited resources and processing power of the PlayStation. And with Tetsuya Nomura as the character designer, every character is immediately recognizable just based on the in-game models alone. The dialogue and character writing is what really makes this game shine. The gameplay is tedious and exhaustive by today's standards, but that can be excused because of the amazing narrative presented in Final Fantasy VII. In the opening cinematic, the audience is given the basic information they need to be properly introduced to the game and its world, without feeling lost or overstimulated. And during the first sequence of the game, we're given context to everything we saw in the opening cutscene, mostly through character dialogue. It doesn't feel overly expository either. Cloud, our protagonist, is meeting these members of Avalanche for the first time, so most of the dialogue here feels completely natural. For now, I won't touch on the story elements themselves, I'll save that for when I begin talking about the remake. I just want to introduce the original and properly emphasize its importance on the Final Fantasy series and the video game industry as a whole. Jesus, take a shot every time I say Final Fantasy. Anyways, another factor contributing to the game's success, and probably the most well recognized of all, is the music. Final Fantasy VII undoubtedly has one of the best OSTs in video game history. Nobuo Uematsu crafted a soundtrack so good, you could layer it over a video of 3 fuckwits stumbling around drunk, and it'd still sound good.
So in the post-fight interview, you got knocked out in the first round, how do you feel?
It cannot be understated how fucking rad One-Winged Angel is. If I heard this as I was waking up, I'd find the nearest weapon and finish myself off with it. Fuck fighting Sephiroth, bro. I'd rather fight my wrist with a butter knife. I just realized I haven't really mentioned the gameplay a whole lot yet. While Final Fantasy VII still utilizes the turn-based battle system that so many RPGs have adopted, the combat remains uniquely different due to one factor: the ATB system. I want to quickly explain TBC, or turn-based combat, for anyone that isn't really familiar. Turn-based combat refers to a battle where each member in your party gets a single turn to perform an action. This action could be using an item, performing an attack, or in some cases switching out a party member. Once an action is completed, the turn is moved down the queue to the next party member. Depending on how many members you have in your party, you will get a set number of turns. In most games that utilize this system, the same rules apply for the enemy. Some RPGs, like the SMT series, use something called a press turn battle system, which is slightly different and actually way more interesting gameplay-wise. Yes, I managed to sneakily mention SMT and make it slightly relevant. Now what's the ATB system? Well, ATB stands for Active Time Battle. Each character in your party has an ATB gauge, and when filled, they'll be able to attack the enemy. Once a command is issued, the gauge will drop to 0. While it is refilling, the player will not be able to perform another action. This ATB gauge essentially replaces the Q used in regular TBC games. What makes the ATB system more interesting from a gameplay perspective is that it forces the player to strategize and think on the fly. The enemies have an ATB gauge too, one the player can't see. This means that depending on how you time your moves, you could be susceptible to attacks whilst your gauge is refilling. But this also means that you can attack while the enemy is waiting. Basically, you're just trading attacks. It's not too different from the turn-based battle system when you break it down, but it's somehow more tense. It makes every fight that much more intimidating, knowing that you could die if you aren't paying attention to the ATB gauges. Final Fantasy VII wasn't the first game in the series to utilize this system though. It was actually introduced in Final Fantasy IV. This system is in the remake, although it's slightly different there. The 4 mainest of main characters you'll be able to control are Cloud Strife, Tifa Lockhart, Barrett Wallace, and Aerith Gainsborough, or Ares, or whatever, I don't fucking know, alright? From the funny little boxy polygons running around on screen, you wouldn't really be able to tell that Cloud is actually a twink.
Wait a minute. Cloud? Is that you? Oh my god, that makeup! And that dress!
Nailed it, I know, thank you. Moving on.
It's his fault that every JRPG protagonist is a small femboy now. I'm pissed. I want big muscly macho men with chiseled jawlines and thunder thighs in my Japanese role-playing games, not this.
I'm a stud. I'm ballsy. I don't take no shit from anyone.
Either give me that, or a chick with big gazongas. Thank you. I rest my case. Tifa is responsible for decades of excellent Rule 34 art, and one particularly entertaining Italian Senate meeting.
Ricerca medica e scientifica.
It's amazing that thousands of 12-year-olds all across the world thought that this was sexy. People were down bad back then. There was no Dead or Alive or Gal Gun. All you had was some triangle titties and your own imagination. Barrett is...
I think that's what her outfit is. It's like a white one piece with a small like black bottom.
She's kind of beautiful, that's for sure.
She hangs out with a small black bottom.
I don't have a close up on Barrett's face.
Okay,
looking bad.
And Aerith is... I don't really have a joke for Aerith. I actually quite like this character.
They got me! They got me!
There's also Jesse, Biggs, Wedge, Zack, Yuffie, and Sid. They're important but get a lot more development in the remake, so I'll save them for later. Final Fantasy VII set the foundation for grittier, darker JRPGs, and I think we wouldn't have games like Drakengard, Kingdom Hearts, or Vagrant Story without it. The JRPG genre probably would have progressed very differently if not for FF7. It also established a bottom line for the series going forwards. Future games would no longer be in 2D. Now that they had jumped from Nintendo to Sony, they had the ability to be more creative and experimental. Now we've hit a sort of roadblock with the series. Games had become stagnant and spin-off titles and other Square Enix properties were becoming more popular than Final Fantasy. That is, until the long-awaited release of Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Peekaboo, Mr. Rourke.
A remake for the acclaimed Final Fantasy VII had been rumoured to be in the works for years before it was finally announced at Sony's E3 conference in 2015. Square Enix had planned on developing a remake for the PlayStation 2 all the way back in the early 2000s. They'd planned to release it alongside Final Fantasy VIII and IX, but the project was scrapped due to the limitations of the hardware. What they wanted to do was expand upon the story and ideas in a grander way, sort of like what the remake did. Whoa, really? If they had tried to do that on the PS2, then they would have ended up cutting content because of limited card space and processing power and blah blah blah. So instead, the idea for a remake was, for now, shelved. Fans began demanding a remake more than ever after Square Enix showed off a tech demo at the Electronic Entertainment Expo in 2005. They had remade the cinematic opening to Final Fantasy VII using their new Crystal Tools engine, an engine that was used to create Final Fantasy XIII and Dragon's Quest X, among other games. This tech demo, combined with the upcoming 10-year anniversary in 2007, had fans practically storming Square Enix's headquarters, demanding a bloody remake. And while Square Enix stood firm in their plans to not remake the game, the idea was still floating around somewhere in the background. It wasn't until the PlayStation 4 was released that the idea would actually become a reality. Over the years, Square Enix had been developing and producing an impressive catalogue of games for the PS4, games such as Life is Strange, Tomb Raider, and Arkham Asylum. It was then that they thought about finally developing a remake for the classic JRPG. Like I said earlier, the remake was announced at Sony's E3 conference in 2015, with a short pre-rendered trailer. It was cryptic and interesting enough to just grab people's attention. When this was announced, the world went fucking berserk. But it would be years without much word on the game. Square Enix was silently perfecting it in the shadows, putting out as few updates as possible. The only other game I could compare this to in terms of hype would be SMT5, but we all know how that turned out.
Look at this dude. Wait till you see the... No, 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 no.
2016 had no new info, and in 2017 and 18 we got some promotional art. Up until 2019, people didn't really know what to expect. The entire game was a mystery, well apart from the story shit cause, you know, it's a remake. But this wasn't going to be the same game, and if it was, people would have been pissed. But if it was too different from the original, fans would be even angrier. It really was a thin line that Square Enix was walking, but after the official trailer was dropped in May of 2019, the masses finally received their answers. We got gameplay footage showing off the new and fully revamped battle system. The combat now resembled an action RPG more than a classic JRPG, which honestly is great. The only games that seem to really nail the dying turn-based combat system are Persona and SMT, and that's arguably the best feature of all those games. Fuck you, Persona 5. The trailer also showed off the new character designs. While the characters were still recognizable, they had gone through some changes. I know everyone complains about Tifa's character design, but at least it's not their fucking Advent Children designs. Jesus Christ.
I'm looking for somebody. Have any of you seen a guy with spiky hair? Spikier.
We then got another trailer in June of the same year showing off more character redesigns, some cutscene stuff, and more gameplay. Hype for the game had boiled to the top and was about to erupt. People only had to wait until March of 2020 until they could get their grubby mitts on this sweet new piece of ass. In early January, a demo for the game was accidentally leaked to the PlayStation Network. The actual demo wouldn't be released until March of that year though. It allowed players to go through the opening of the game, wherein Cloud meets up with Barrett, Jesse, Biggs and Wedge on a mission to blow up a Mako reactor. The response to the demo only boosted the hype, and around this time was when I got on board too. Data miners were able to extract some shit from the leaked demo. Loading screens, quest menus and a shitload of images. All of this stuff was a work in progress still, but it was interesting nonetheless. However, not everything went smoothly. The game suffered a bump in the road. The development team released a statement on January 14th stating that the game would be pushed back to April 10th. Their excuse was that they wanted much more time to perfect their vision, which I think is completely understandable. A month delay isn't too bad, and the game was already looking clean as fuck. April 10th rolled around and the game finally dropped. Was it good? Yes. Was it worth experiencing? Probably yes. Did it have its fair share of problems? As with any remake, yes. While Final Fantasy VII Remake is a good game, it wasn't what a lot of people were expecting. It both exceeded expectations and underperformed. Compared to Final Fantasy XV and Kingdom Hearts 3, it was a fucking masterpiece. But there were still a few issues. But there was also a lot of new content to love. In order to properly go over my thoughts on the game coherently, I think it best to start at the beginning, with a simple mission to take down a reactor.
Shit piss fuck cock pee pee wiener butthole wee wee suck.
Cyberpunk femboy Guts over here is an ex-soldier warrior turned mercenary. Soldier are an elite militarized group created and used by the Shinra Electric Power Company. Throughout the game you encounter both members of Soldier and Turks, another force created by Shinra. The Turks are basically secret police / investigators. The name Turks is an unofficial one. Their real name within Shinra is the Investigation Sector of General Affairs Department, a name that just reeks of bureaucracy. The Turks might be my favourite group of antagonists and boss fights in the entire remake. Cloud has been hired by Avalanche, a terrorist cell operating in Midgar. Their goal is to stop Shinra from sapping the world of all of its natural resources, the most important being Mako. Mako is harvested from the earth with these large reactors. There are 8 plants across Midgar in total, but being a mercenary, naturally you only care about the money and do not align yourself with the goals of the organization. The opening section is fairly easy. It does a good job at introducing the new gameplay, but makes it just difficult enough for the player that they'll still be on their toes. As you and fellow Avalanche members descend into the reactor, fending off Shinra security officers and guard dogs, you get to learn more about the operation. Barrett comes off as a hot-headed but passionate member of the organization, and while he initially bumps heads with Cloud, they soon become strong allies. This part is also where you're introduced to Jesse.
So, you know Tifa, right? It's not really my business, but are you guys close?
Huh?
Biggs. And Badger.
You think you could maybe hook me up with some crystal?
Giving these side characters voices and backstories and story missions really fleshes them out for the better. Out of all the middling and bad reviews I saw for the remake, the only thing people seemed to unanimously agree was good was the much needed character depth and development given to the other members of Avalanche. And while I gave 0 shits about them in the original, this remake managed to actually make me care. Puzzles are introduced alongside the enemies, if you can even call this a puzzle.
Look what we have here.
A laser security system. Great.
Those things will hurt more than your pride if you're careless. They'll cut you down to size and then some. But I'm guessing you've done this kind of thing before.
Yeah. Figure out the timing of the lasers. Then, make a move when they cycle off.
Exactly.
As well as long-range turrets, which can only be attacked by Barrett. Equipped with an armed cannon, he's able to take out enemies from a distance, making him extremely useful when faced with larger groups of enemies. Jesse, Biggs and Wedge split up from Barrett and Cloud as they move forward to place the C4 charge. You're given the choice to set the timer on the explosive to either 30 minutes or 20. Essentially, this is the game prodding you into choosing a time you're comfortable with. It'll be important in a second. And as soon as you select your time of choice, the first boss appears. In the original game, this first encounter can be quite challenging if you're still getting used to the game and its strange combat system, but here it's relatively easy to take out. Of course, that timer you set earlier will be a determining factor. You don't want to be fighting the thing in the reactor when that charge goes off. So it's a frantic race against time, trying to kill a boss with an impossibly large health pool and limited supplies to aid you. The mechanics so far are relatively easy to grasp. With a simple button tap, you're able to switch between party members, and selecting spells and special attacks from the menu slows time down, giving you time to evaluate and plan. Of course, strategizing becomes more necessary and fun once you're able to purchase and customize materia, but for now your choices are limited. Okay, I spent all that time earlier explaining fucking ATB gauges and battle systems and shit. I guess I gotta explain materia now. I know people hate the fucking materia tutorial, and so do I, but I don't care. Materia are basically enhancements you can add to weapons that allow you to cast spells, summon allies, and temporarily boost player stats among other things. They're these small anal bead looking things you can slap on your weapons. Each weapon has a different number of materia slots, and the balls are actually visible on some of the weapon models whilst playing. The materia system is actually pretty complicated, so I won't go into it too much here. I'll leave a link in the description to the Final Fantasy wiki in case you want to read up on it for some reason. The materia system is used in both the original and the remake and functions pretty much the same in both games. The lore behind materia is actually kinda interesting. The wiki describes it as such. Materia is crystallized Mako. Metaphysically, materia calls upon the wisdom of the life stream to manipulate nature, manifesting as the phenomenon of magic for most materia, although other materia enhance the user's abilities. Unless one is descended from the Cetra, materia is the only way humans can use magic. When explaining how materia is created to Zack and Tifa on Mount Nibel, Sephiroth mentions that he and Professor Hojo debated the nature of materia. Hojo objected to the term magic being applied to powers from materia, but could offer no better term. It's stuff like this that I really like about the Final Fantasy series. The small ways each game introduces otherwise bland RPG themes like magic and such, but elevates it using interesting lore. Where were we? Oh, right. While the boss fight is tedious and stressful, it's stressful in a good way. It's as if the game's saying you have to beat this boss, otherwise you probably shouldn't attempt the rest of the game. And while I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, to an extent it's not inaccurate. Out of all the bosses thus far, only one has given me a lot of trouble, to the point of having to quit for a while to cool down. It's usually the regular enemies that give me more trouble than the bosses. The specific fuckers that do my head into no end come up much later in the game, so I won't talk about them now. The time limit you set for yourself lights a fucking fire under your ass. If you're still getting used to the controls and such, this boss can be challenging, but still fair. Alright, either it's you, pal, or this shit's just got bad game feel. And that's game feel in big quotation marks. See, I even wrote it in the script. Now you're looking at the script. Boy, this is really meta. Oh wait, no, don't read ahead! Now you're probably thinking, based purely on the footage on the screen, that the game looks completely different to the original in terms of gameplay, and you'd be half right. Having the ability to roam the entire arena is great and incredibly freeing. At times it feels like you're playing a more restricted version of Kingdom Hearts. The ATB system is still present too, but it's less obvious if that makes sense. I don't know. You can freely attack with your sword without consuming stamina, but using magic or your limit break abilities will bring down their respective gauges. What's the limit break? They're special moves each character in your party is able to perform. The limit system also uses a gauge to determine how many breaks you can use, but it's separate from the ATB gauge. This was a mechanic in the original too, and functions basically the same here. The more damage you deal out and receive from enemies, the faster the limit break gauge is, similar to the rage you feel when losing your 50th game of Fortnite in a row. That's a little joke for all the 12-year-olds watching, and you, Kyan. Another new feature to the combat is the ability to switch between 2 different modes whilst fighting. Every playable character has a secondary mode they can switch to as well. Cloud's are Operator mode and Punisher mode. Punisher mode is extremely useful for when you land a critical hit on an enemy, and it's great for clearing enemies when they're all clustered together. When you hit a crit, they'll enter a stunlock mode and you'll be able to land hits on them without receiving damage. Using Punisher mode during the act of stunlock allows you to wail on the enemy even faster and harder than usual. It's a good way of annihilating an enemy's health bar quickly. I think most people won't struggle too hard on this first boss. I beat it first try and I'm fucking terrible at this game. Fuck, I'm terrible at all the Final Fantasy games. I can already see some fucker typing, "That must be why you don't like them, nonce," in the comments. But that's the end of Chapter 1. All in all, Chapter 1 is good. It's a great introduction and perfectly gears you up for what's to come. It also allows you to experiment with the new combat a little bit before it introduces more elements such as materia and new weapons and equipment. While this chapter isn't particularly long, it's perhaps one of the most enjoyable in the game. The boss fight isn't totally satisfying, but amongst the other bosses in the game, it's really not too bad. Everything has been good up until now. I've had no complaints. I've been pretty happy so far. The end of Chapter 1 is where the demo for the game ended. Demo players didn't have to experience this slightly annoying character and plot insert that makes my blood boil. Each member of Avalanche splits up as the reactor explodes, escaping amongst the massive crowd of curious bystanders in chaos. And while you control Cloud trying to run away, 2 important things happen here. They're both character and story related. So Cloud bumps into Aerith here, something that was not originally seen in the first game. Well, it was, but it's And I actually don't mind this new addition. It adds a lot more character to both Aerith and Cloud and works as a good introduction to her character. Now for something I'm not a big fan of, the Sephiroth hallucinations. This inclusion horribly ruins the pacing of this section and needlessly fucks with the story. These hallucinations are not needed whatsoever, and I'm honestly confused as to why they were included. This whole part basically turns into a trailing mission from Assassin's Creed, except you can't fucking fail it. You cannot escape. It's bad from a gameplay perspective, a story perspective, and a character perspective too. Stop it. Bad Sephiroth. But once you get past this annoying ass shit, you get to fight your way through some guards before finally reaching the train.
Guess Cloud won't be joining us after all.
No need to assume the worst. I'm sure he's fine. You saw him in action, didn't you? Guy's a soldier. Goddamn one-man army.
You think he's a keeper?
Michael. You had me worried for a minute.
Huh?
What the hell you been up to, huh?
Giving public security the runaround. That's what. Had to draw them away from the station somehow.
Nicely done.
Well, can't argue with results.
Your time in the train has been expanded upon significantly compared to the original. Here we get some more simping from Jessie. Wait, can girls simp after guys? Okay, no gender specifications. Years of seeing Redditors commit social suicide has caused me to think simping was male specific. Anyways, you get some good world building here with how the NPCs on the train react to the main character and the members of Avalanche. Again, this expands on something introduced in the original, but in a good way. You'll see a lot of this here. The game will expand on things positively and negatively.
Take a good look. It's because of that great big pizza in the sky that people down there gotta struggle to survive. Shinra sucks up Mako while the soil turns to dust, the air fills with smog, and the flowers die.
Then leave and don't look back. That's what's always worked for me.
Well, that's all well and good. If you're only out for yourself. But the folks down there don't have the luxury of choice, you know?
Like this train, I suppose. There's only one way it can go.
I think now would be the best time to bring this up, but I'm going to be skipping over a lot here. I want to focus on the characters, story, gameplay, music, etc. But this video would be as long as the game if I were to include everything. This really isn't a walkthrough if that wasn't painfully obvious by now. I will not be showing you how to get Le Secret Hidden Super Flaming Buster Sword of Death or whatever. This is just a really poorly thought out video essay. On top of that, some stuff presented in earlier chapters won't be mentioned either. This is mainly because these things get a proper explanation later on in the story, and if you've played the game, you know what I'm fucking talking about.
Mako is the lifeblood of the planet? Yeah, the hell it is. Goddamn eco-warriors with dumbass posters. I tear them down and they're back up inside of an hour, like I've got nothing better to do. I mean, look at all that steel work. You trying to tell me that's not progress?
Anyways, after combing through the Sector 7 slums for a bit, you finally arrive at the bar Avalanche has been using as their base of operations, 7th Heaven. Here we meet Tifa Lockhart, fan favourite of freaks and perverts everywhere, from Newgrounds to the Italian Senate. I will not stop mentioning that fucking cursed fact. That Senate meeting will be in goddamn history books in 50 years' time. You mark my fucking words. Here you are able to give Tifa the flower Aerith gave you, which unlocks some stupid romance shit later on in chapter 14, blah blah blah, whatever. What I'm more interested in is the significance of these flowers in Final Fantasy VII, and more specifically the symbolism of flowers in general in the Final Fantasy series. The yellow flower symbolizes reunion, as explained by Aerith. This is a theme that was not present in the original and is introduced in the remake, and I quite like it. Cloud joining Avalanche marks not only a reunion between him and Tifa, his childhood friend, but also the eventual reunion between him and Sephiroth. The yellow flowers also have special significance throughout many of the spin-off titles in the Final Fantasy VII universe. It's explained that the yellow flowers can only grow in the church below the Sector 5 slums. This is because Midgar is so fucked up and polluted that they can't realistically grow anywhere else. The flowers are a nice juxtaposition to the industrialized threat that Shinra represents, and basically serves the same purpose as Mako thematically. There's also a lot of flower symbolism in Advent Children, but I am not touching that shit right now. Advent Children is a film that is generally looked down upon by most fans of the series, and a whole fucking can of worms that I really don't want to bust open. I'll probably be forced to talk about this and or Crisis Core later on, but for now, just get that shit out of here. Tifa shows you to an apartment complex which doesn't exactly appear poverty-stricken enough in my opinion. The average Japanese apartment complex looks worse than this. Now we are introduced to the worst thing in this game, let alone any JRPG. The side quests.
We bring new filters, collect the old ones, and get paid. What?
Give me a break. I'm not a salesman. I'm a soldier.
Which is why no one will refuse to pay. What do you say? Please?
Let's get this over with.
While I can tolerate boring side quests in some JRPGs, namely Nier Automata and Nocturne, the shit here is just so fucking boring. The game forces you to follow Tifa around for a while, running these tedious ass errands, and the player's supposed to just sit there and be like, oh fuck yeah, this gameplay rocks my fucking world, like fuck yeah. This shit, this right here, this isn't fun. This is annoying padding, and I will not stand for it. In fact, in my first run through of the game, I didn't stand for it. I largely ignored the side quests. That may have been foolish of me from a completionist perspective, but I stand by my decision. If the developers hadn't made such boring ass side content, then I'd totally engage with it, 100%. So with all that boring shit out of the way, we can finally return to what really matters. Murdering Shinra guards. You have this fuckwad Johnny, and he pisses his pantaloons and scuttles off into the sunset. Man, I sure do hope we never see him again. I mean, Cloud does offer to slaughter Johnny, but Tifa stops him because she's a good person. I don't know, man. I say we handle him with the Breaking Bad approach. After running pointless errands for 12 hours straight because Avalanche is poor and can't afford to pay Cloud the money he's owed, he and Tifa return to 7th Heaven. She makes you her signature cocktail, Gamer Girl P. Then fucks off to go bone Barrett downstairs or something. I don't pay attention to this game. Barrett refuses to take Cloud on their next mission, probably because he's poor, but thanks to this we're able to embark on one of the best narrative detours in the game. I mentioned before that side characters originally received very little backstory and development before they were, you know, axed. The remake remedies this by adding an entire chapter dedicated to Cloud just hanging out with Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge. Normally this would be filler content that I'd complain endlessly about, except this chapter is really fun and engaging. It introduces this cool-ass biking segment which surprisingly controls extremely well.
So far so good.
Alright, here comes the hard part.
That is...
Jesse has hired Cloud so that they can steal some more blasting agent from a Shinra warehouse on Midgar's surface. On the way, you fend off some Shinra whilst riding and are then greeted by a soldier named Roach.
This dude is just cool. He's cool, alright? He's like a cross between James and JP, but instead of doing handstands on Trans Am and walking around with fake bimbo tits, fucking hits sick wheelies on a motorcycle. Shit's rad. All this section is really missing is some clown bikers. After all that sweet action, we get a little breather. It's revealed that Jesse's father used to work for Shinra, but became comatose after he was caught in an industrial accident, which gave him Mako poisoning. The others distract Jesse, but MILF, whilst Cloud sneaks in through the back to retrieve an ID card that they'll need to get into the warehouse. This chapter is just rife with character moments, and I really like it. There's a bit of nice dialogue between Cloud, Biggs, and Wedge on your trip to the warehouse. It's interesting and weirdly sentimental or something. It's hard to explain.
Jesse's dad was in there, right?
Yeah.
Mako poisoning. Happened while Jesse was doing a show with the Gold Saucer. What do you care?
No. I want to hear it.
Jessie always wanted to be an actress. Worked her ass off for years. Until finally she caught a break. Top billing. Parents were thrilled. And then, right before opening night,
Her dad had an accident.
collapsed from overwork. And in the worst possible place, Mako's storage. Lay there half a day before someone found him. Been like that ever since. No change whatsoever. And that's what got her into planetology. And led her to seek out Avalanche. How far we've come.
Jesse's got a theory about it. Thinks her dad's spirit is stuck now, between his body and the heart of the planet. So if we don't shut down the reactors soon...
He'll get caught up in the flow and poof. What's so funny?
Just that I understand how you feel. Unlike most of the time.
I see.
I think the combination of the slick but simple writing and the excellent fucking VAs are what make this scene, and this chapter actually, really worthwhile and important. I also find it pretty weird that these three dum-dums received so much more character development, whilst Tifa and like a handful of other characters are just tossed to the wayside. Barrett and Aerith receive a good deal of development, but I think we all know why that is. Now inside the warehouse, Cloud, Biggs, and Wedge create a diversion, giving Jesse enough time to procure the blasting agent. There's a big lengthy battle involving tons of Shinra infantry and sweepers. That is until Roche arrives again. He and Cloud duel, and this is another boss fight that I hold in high regard. I think I've started to notice a pattern here. Human bosses are just a lot funner to fight than the big monsters or beefy machine enemies. It's almost as if they have easily telegraphed movesets and provide an interesting twist to gameplay. So you kick the shit out of Roche, and he retreats with this sweet line of dialogue.
There are higher heights to which you and I can still soar.
Once he fucks off, you and Biggs make a run for it whilst Wedge gets harpooned by a sweeper and then kidnapped by different terrorists. The four of you all reunited like 2 minutes later though, so I don't know, cool I guess. After what feels like a very destructive and slightly less than inconspicuous night of death and mayhem, you all sail out of there, returning to the slums beneath the rotting pizza. Landing back in Sector 7, you learn that Wedge lives with a bunch of cats, and no one else. Then you reunite with Jesse, and this happens.
Oh. Okay, I get it. Mind letting me breathe?
Depends. Mind coming over tomorrow night? My roommates should all be out for a while.
Alright, all the slander and shade I've thrown at Tifa this video, I mean it's well deserved, but there's a moment at the end of this chapter that I actually quite like. Before Cloud storms the warehouse, he has a flashback to his early teen years. It's a scene that was present in the original too, but damn. I know it's an unfair comparison, but fuck me, this game's ass-shittingly beautiful. All those flashy neon colours stimulate the little throbbing walnut floating around inside my worm-infested skull. Once you return from your little adventure and are preparing to wind down for the night, you receive a knock at your door. It's Tifa, and no, she's not here to recreate the famous Senate video. I will never stop mentioning it. She and Cloud chat for a little while, and I think I'm just gonna let this scene play out.
Oh, that guy.
You weren't thinking of leaving Midgar anytime soon, were you?
Well, seems this old friend of mine's in a tight spot. Long time ago I said I'd be there for her. Made a promise. So...
Can't say this is quite what I had in mind when I put that on you way back when.
If you want to talk, I'm listening.
Huh? What's with you all of a sudden?
With me?
Like you're losing that hard edge.
That bad?
Not at all. I like it. Maybe Marlene won't be so scared of you next time. I'm really glad to have you back, Cloud. Really glad. It's pretty late, huh? I'd like to catch up more, but we should probably both get some sleep, yeah?
Yeah.
Good night, then.
It's nice, I don't know. The quieter moments sprinkled in amidst the chaos and confusion are really refreshing and sweet. FF7 Remake manages to perfectly cater to its audience by invoking so many different emotions throughout its story. This praise extends to both the original and even Crisis Core and Advent Children a little bit. As shite as that film is, it's still oddly comforting. Berserk similarly has moments of stillness and quiet reflection which really help to drive home the main themes of the story and the Lovecraftian-ass void of despair that is Guts' character. I'll admit that Berserk tackles some very different and more complex themes and ideas than FF7, and does it more tactfully too, but that's the link my mind created between them.
Holy fuck, this video is long. I'm tired, you're probably tired. I think here's a good place to end this shit. Especially since I gotta talk about this. And I really don't want to talk about this right now, so whatever. I'll do it next time, I guess. Final Fantasy VII Remake has an incredibly strong start and introduces a lot of fresh and interesting ideas, themes, gimmicks, and gameplay tweaks that give me mad scritchies. It's pretty much only downhill from here, folks.